Move to 5-minute calls, warning bell at 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Look, I'd like to start by talking just briefly about the previous Speaker's speech, which not that really. I agree with some of it, but the duty to vote I take issue with. We have not a compulsion to vote here as in Australia. We are obliged to be on the roll. We are duty-bound to do that, but we are not, in fact, obliged to vote, Mr Speaker. Voting is a major right. It is a right that people have fought and died for. I'm unaware if any suffragettes died in this country, but certainly they did in England in the early part of last century to obtain the right to vote. It was that important that women were prepared to go onto racetracks and be trampled to death to get the right to vote. There can be no democracy, Mr Speaker, without voting. One inevitably follows the other. Criminals in prison, I am afraid I disagree with Ms Dalzell, but she's made a good point that there are indeed disparities in treatment between those who are in prison and those on home detention. Perhaps this is something that could be addressed at Select Committee, because on the face of it, certainly, someone who receives a sentence of home detention, if they can theoretically get home detention for a serious offence, perhaps that can be looked at. But, Mr Speaker, by and large, contrary to what Ms Dalzell has said, people are in prison for very serious offending. They are deprived of their liberty, which is a right not much less than the right to vote, perhaps. They are there for either repeat violent offending, very serious violent offending, or having stolen a lot of money. They have broken the social contract we all make to abide by the laws that we make in this place. They are there for a reason, Mr Speaker. And the point, or the question to be asked is simply this: why should such people be allowed to exercise a right that people have died for? That's not a melodramatic question, it's a very serious one. Mr Speaker, although this is a private member's bill, in my view it's part of a sea change that this government has embarked upon in the law and order field. Along with measures to combat drug abuse and other drivers of crime, the National Act government is making it very clear that prison ought to be a place that you do not want to return to. And Mr Speaker, while it is incorrect that our prisons are five-star hotels, I've visited 7 or 8 of them and that is not so, neither are they hellholes or particularly unpleasant. That is changing, Mr Speaker. This government, with the full support of the ACT Party, is introducing container cells. Now, the party on the other side wails and moans about the inhumanity of that. If they had a bit of life experience, they would know that anyone who's worked in a mine in Australia or on an oil rig has lived in something very similar to what is proposed out at Rimutaka Prison. Container prisons will not be like the so-called Milton Hilton, the centrally heated prison in the South Island. They will not be like the Nafar prison opened under this government, under the previous government. They will not have a large sculpture at a cost of a couple of $1 million to indicate the spirit returning to the sea. Mr Speaker, last week I was speaking to a Rotary group in the North Island near Nafar about the 3 Strikes bill, which is soon to pass in this House. And after my speech, I took questions. And one of the audience was a doctor, and he asked me what I thought about prison conditions, and I said pretty much what I've just said. They're not 5-star hotels, but neither are they hellholes, and they should be places that people do not want to return to. Afterwards, he came up to me and he said that he treated all the prisoners from Nafar prison who had ear, nose and throat problems. And purely for his interest, he asked them how they found it there. What did they think about life out there? And he said every single one of them said they were very comfortable, thanks. The food was great. They weren't required to work. They were very happy. Now, either that man's lying, and he didn't seem like a liar to me, or we've made our prisons too comfortable. That is changing, Mr Speaker, and I applaud that, and as does my party. This bill is symptomatic of that and part of that, and we are proud to support it. Thank you.
Charles Cheval.
Mr Speaker, this bill is nothing more than the latest in a long line of dog whistle attempts to make the government, the National Party,